Who dat to you, everybody, and welcome into Who Dat Confessional podcast, where we're not really going to talk about the passing of O.J. Simpson. Rest in peace, Mr. Athletic Great. But we will talk about the New Orleans Saints, and in particular, I really want to get y'all's opinion, those who come to the show live, what you're looking forward to in the draft, but more than that, who you're looking forward to seeing in the draft, where you want certain players to go, whether it comes to New Orleans or not. We'll go over all those names and maybe even peruse Lance Zierlein's scouting reports over on NFL.com. However we end up doing it, I know it's going to be a great episode because it's with Who Dat Nation, which is the greatest nation in all of sports. Do, however, want to give a close second to that reward. Pels Nation, congratulations. Beat the Blazers, moved in the sixth spot, at least for the moment, and hopefully the Pelicans can win out and maintain that record. We'll see, but if you can lose four in a row, you can win four in a row. So I'm going to need them to really do that. Avoid all the play-in situations, just actually be in the playoffs, and let's see what these Pelicans can do. I love the Pelicans and love the Saints. So here we are. Here we are today, trying to be great. Who dat to you if you are in the channel live? Nikki DeFish, Josh Sontem, James Griffon, the Antonio, Mr. Wright, Mr. Jerry, the most prolific supporter of New Orleans Saints football podcast around the world. TJ, one of our moderators. I guess we put up with him. Antonio, and everybody else. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Going to be very curious to see who all you choose as your main, well, love interest. Yeah, you can have a love interest with football. It's not gay. It's football. Okay? You can. You feeling bad about it? Well, that's too damn bad. You better have somebody that you've fallen for, because I certainly have got a long list of players I want the New Orleans Saints to draft. And if you don't like my players, well, I've got news for you. I don't care. So we're going to talk about that and more, but I'm more curious than what I want is what y'all want. And the cool thing about the draft is we are all equally ignorant, right? I have gotten to spend years studying scouting. I went to a scouting school. I've gotten to work with NFL teams, including the New Orleans Saints, which is so cool. I am just as ignorant to what they're doing as anybody else in the chat. So regardless of your education, your background, your affiliation, odds are, unless you actually own the war rooms of all 32 teams, you're in for a lot of surprises. And I'm pretty excited about that. I really am. It is one of the things that I enjoy the most about the draft. And I've seen guys like, say, Dallas Turner going everywhere from Atlanta to even somebody putting him in New Orleans, which, no, thank you. No, thank you. No, that's just me. We're going to talk about all that and more. As far as Saints news goes, we do try to do a little bit of a recap on Saints news as much as possible. Truthfully, there's not a lot to recap, but there's still some things that we can kind of discuss, I guess, a little bit. If you look in the background, obviously we have our podcast going around, but you also have the draft profile for Talise Fuaga that just came up. We've talked about him and how he can be a potential draft pick for the New Orleans Saints. And I did also want to remind you of the New Orleans Saints players they visited for the 30-day visit. So we've got them having Chop Robinson coming in, who is a potential first to second round defensive end. Keon Coleman out of Florida State. You've got Christian Mahogany out of Boston College. Marshawn Nealon out of Michigan. Then you got Dylan LeVay, running back, actually somebody that I think is real possible for them to end up with. Keep an eye out on that one. Christian Boyd out of Northern Iowa. Marshawn Lloyd out of USC. And then Rico Payton out of Pittsburgh are part of their top 30 visits so far. You've also got local pro days where we saw them attend the pro day to look at Brian Thomas Jr., look at Tulane's Michael Pratt, to look at Jackson State's Josh Clark, to look at Appalachian State's Andrew Parker, Tulane's Jaquan Jackson. Any of those names ring any bells for y'all that y'all love? Maybe? Maybe not? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But I just think that there's no wrong answer. I really am excited. Nikki DeFish says, where's the best national in the world? No nation. Thank you. What's their best national in the world? Nikki, Oh, the best nation in the world. Okay. I get you. Donation. My man confused me with the super chat, and I'm like, who the best national, the best, the who, the what, the ha-. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Scout says I will happily drive the JC Latham hype train. Okay, let's talk about it. First one of the day. Why? Defend yourself. Nothing wrong with having that as your prospect. In fact, let's talk about some of the things that I've seen from JC Latham. Number one, where would you start him? And do you think he's ready to go? I think that when it comes to height, weight, speed, he has a lot of the things that you look for. I would say athletically, he is a little bit limited due to his just gargantuan size. He is a very, very large man. Now, he's not as tall as a certain offensive lineman that we talked about here recently, but I think he's really good. My only thing with Latham is I don't think that for better or for worse, the New Orleans Saints are moving from that right tackle spot off Ryan Ramczyk. They expect him to come back. But I think Latham is a fantastic looking tackle who does have the athleticism if needed to play both sides. He also played guard, so you have some versatility there, but started all 13 games at right tackle back in 2022, started all 14 games at right tackle last year, and has basically been an exclusive right side of the line player. But he has a lot of things to really like about him. A couple of weaknesses here and there. He can open up his shoulder a little bit too much, and I've watched. I mean, it's easy to see Alabama tape. I would say that speed rushes can get him in a lot of ways. He is similar to Ryan Ramczyk. Love his length though. Dude's got like 35 something inch arms and 6'6". Probably will I see him lose 10 pounds. I know that's weird to say, but he's 345 ish. I actually like to see him maybe in that 330 number and get a little bit of that speed back up there. But he's a very good player. I think my only question is, where is he going to fit with the New Orleans Saints? So, yeah, great question. I actually love the name brought up, right? And I want you to bring up more. And actually, Scout, while you're here, throw out why more you like him. Seriously. I am quite curious. I love to see names like that. Scout says, bro, he's a top 5 grade for me in class with not much top end ceiling. Best balance I've seen from a player that big, plus can be absolutely demolishing in the run game. Functional run and passer. None of these guys are too ready versus Jordan Morgan, high floor if we pick more and immediate impact. My only thing is I just don't necessarily see where he plays with the New Orleans Saints right now. So that means you're probably going to have to redshirt him at least 1 year. It's really tough for me to sell that, right? Like a first round pick that would redshirt, unless you actually see them move on from Ryan Ramczyk. I do like what he can immediately do because I think to an extent you're right that a lot of the tackles that are in this draft who I actually do like need some development. He is very ready to go today, even though I don't think he'll ever be an all-pro. I don't feel like he has some of the upper traits you look for that. I do think he has good footwork coming in. We talked about with a couple of other guys that need footwork coming in. For me, I think when he gets beat, he just gets beat because other guys are going to be better than him as an athlete across the way. Now, he's got great size and tremendous size and length can overcome athleticism sometimes, but I think that's going to be an issue for him because he's so big. Lateral quickness is something that when you watch the combine, you can see he's not the most laterally quick offensive lineman, which could be an issue for New Orleans, who uses a lot of those type of sets. So there are pros and cons to his work. I don't think he has the highest upside of a lot of tackles, but I do think that if you needed somebody to come in and slide in an NFL game today, he's one of the most ready to go offensive linemen in this draft. And I like that a lot. I think that there's value to that. It's what do you want more? Do you want high upside, or would you rather have a guy who is maybe high floor but doesn't have the potential to be an all-pro? Like, in my opinion, having watched Latham, there's nothing that makes you go, oh, he's a Teron Armstead level of athlete that if he is healthy and reaches his potential, he goes nuts. But at the same time, he's ready to go right now. You know exactly what you're getting and who could actually be a Pro Bowl level player at his position. I just don't know if he'll ever be special. And then you have to decide, what are you doing with Ryan Ramczyk? But all of this is just fun conjecture, right? I enjoy it. Antonio brings up Keon Coleman, another player who I actually really, really like. I think that Coleman is, in my opinion, he is the most New Orleans fit receiver that is realistic for them to grab in the draft. What do I mean by that very complicated statement? He is a natural fit for a West Coast split end. He is perfect for it. He's 215, 6'3", decent length, hand size maybe a little small, but hey, do that old Michael Thomas hand yoga. He's a guy that I think you pick up in the second round and fits New Orleans perfectly. He is not a top tier guy. There are definitely guys in the draft who could play that number one spot that I would rather have than him, as I'll see being realistic to get them. An example would be probably Marvin Harrison Jr., who I've lauded over, who I absolutely love, who could play flanker. He can play split end, but he's not going to be there. Like, they're just not happening. Absolutely not. He is not going to be there if you're watching. But I like Keon Coleman, and there are a couple of other guys kind of in that same bubble that I also like that could come in and fit. And the good thing is, when you're talking about Keon Coleman, is you don't need him to come in and be elite, right? You just need Keon Coleman to be a solid player, backing up what you have in an already explosive Rashid Shaheed, and then this real star of your wide receiver room, Chris Olave. So I think that's a good matchup. Doesn't mean it's a perfect option, but I do think if you could get him at like pick 45, and I think that he'll probably be around pick 45. Here's why I think Keon Coleman will be pick 45. Because you got guys like Malik Neighbors out of LSU. You have Marvin Harrison Jr., but you also have Brian Thomas Jr. You've got Troy Franklin, right? You've got Ricky Parasol, who I think might be one of the first, nickel guys who can shoot up, or slot guys who can shoot up and be a high draft pick, right? You've got Lad McConkey. Lad McHonky. Oh, we got a honky at wide receiver. What can happen? What can happen? Great things. Great things when you got top graded honkies. What can I say? I'm celebrating my people. Shout out to all the other honkies out there. There's just a lot of different options you can go with. And there's just, I think, a very good class of wide receiver this year. Depending on what you're looking for, there's something for you. If you're needing a split in, you got it. If you need an elite flanker, it's there. If you want a really good slot guy, those are also available. This is a solid year for wide receiver. Now, you might not have like the elite wide receiver that just goes, hey, clear and away, the number one, the best player, et cetera, et cetera. That might not be the case. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of depth to the position. I wonder if chat agrees. I think a lot of depth to the position. Mr. Wright says, I like Marshawn Nealon, defensive end out of Michigan. So my question to you would be, why do you like him? I'm going to ask this to everybody, by the way. I'm not singling you out. Why do you like him? And where would you take him? Right? Why do you like him and where would you take him? Here's my issue with Marshawn Nealon. Number one, I need to know where he's taken. That's the number one issue. Where are you taking him? Number two, he is arguably the most athletic defensive end in this class. However, that athleticism is he is raw. I think he plays with great motor. You can see his agility on the field. You definitely saw his agility when you watched the Underwear Olympics and the Combine, but he does not have a pass rush plan. He does not have a very diverse pass rush move set. Doesn't have a ton of consistency. And I think that he needs to work on his hand usage. But none of that's a negative thing. I think if you're a team like New Orleans, where you've got Granderson, Chase Young, technically Peyton Turner, Isaiah Foskey, Carl Granderson, Cameron Jordan, you could absolutely grab him if he falls. Right? I think that's a completely legitimate option, but I think that he is absolutely a redshirt / rotational guy year one, maybe even a year two, who has the potential to explode. Because you're talking about a guy who is 6'3" with 34-inch arms, right? You're talking about a guy who is probably the best, most athletic player at his position at the Combine. Sean Payton over here just drooling like crazy, like heavy drool, like he's making noises that you should not be making on live podcasts. And his RAS, for those curious, was like a 9.6 or something. It's nuts. It's nuts. Now, keep in mind that used to playing a lot of interior work in the NFL, you're not going to have a guy that's 265 playing interior work. You're going to move him to the outside, take advantage of his length, his speed, etc. So that's also another thing where you're going to have to get him adjusted to how he actually plays. Teams, I think, are going to want to see him as a 4-3 pass rusher, which is exactly what New Orleans would want, instead of being a 3 tech that he can have familiarity with. And that means time. But at the same time, potential really, really there. So you can teach a lot of things that guys aren't familiar with that maybe they don't have snap experience in. But either way, this is still a guy that I think if New Orleans takes him, he needs to be a day 3 pick. That's just where I would grade him. Now, Scout says Nealon's a violent run defender. Won't be surprised if DA picks run stuffer in round 2. That's fair. We talked about Devondre Sweat here recently, on the last episode. I think that is a very legitimate option. Even though that you have Colin Saunders, there is a potential to... I hate to use big names and comps because y'all know I'm not real big on comps. But there's a reason that people have said the name Vita Vea in the same breath. Doesn't mean he's going to be that. Doesn't mean he has fantastic potential to be a really, really, really good player. Really good player. So even though you have Colin Saunders, remember the key to a good drafting team is taking best player available. And that means sometimes you take a guy when you already have that position. An example, New Orleans still took Michael Thomas when they had Brandon Cooks. And they were operating Brandon Cooks as a number 1. He would even line up on the line as a split end sometimes. Sometimes you take a guy even when you have a guy. You had a Pro Bowler in Mark Ingram, still went and got Alvin Kamara. And thank God you did, right? So BPA is the way to address the draft, in my opinion, in almost every situation. There are some times where you do need to, quote unquote, reach, but generally not. No, generally you don't want to reach. Generally that is reaching, just like in the NBA, is a penalty. We don't like reaching. Y'all can't tell I've been watching a lot of basketball lately, can you? Hopefully y'all have as well, supporting the Pels. Been watching a lot of basketball. I am so excited about the Pels hopefully getting their crap together. Just has got to be consistent. Got to be consistent. By the way, if you are following the Pels, I know this is kind of random, but I've been giving them a lot of love on the show because we are getting to the end of the NBA's regular season. Your New Orleans Pelicans do play tonight against the Kings in Sacramento, and you need to see the Pelicans win that matchup, okay? So if you are trying to keep on score where everybody is at, the Kings are actually only like a game and a half behind the Pelicans. They're the 8th seed right now. And the Suns, of course, are the team that you got to stay ahead of so you can stay and keep that 6th seed, with it being very unlikely that the Mavericks are going to drop, right? I think the Mavericks have actually already clinched the division. So if you're the Pels, you've got to maintain that 6th seed, which essentially you need to win out to guarantee that you have it. They control their destiny. But you absolutely can't lose to the Kings because the further down you drop, the more potential you are of having to play like the Lakers or the Warriors, etc. in the play-in. So keep in mind, watch that Kings game. Hopefully you'll see Brandon Ingram returning soon, and hopefully you'll see Zion continue to be close out Zion. It's been really nice to see close out Zion. I think that he's been doing, in my opinion, a good job. I don't know how everybody else feels, but a good job. So, a good job. Let's see. Nealon measured all crazy, yet can't bend the edge. Well, there's some truth to that, but Carl Granderson wasn't great at bending the edge originally either. And sometimes it works out. You just need proper training and proper coaching, and you can learn some of that athleticism. Or you can end up being like Marcus Davenport and just be a bull in the china shop your entire career and never be able to have any level of ankle flexion and always just fall on your keister. It just really kind of varies and depends. That wasn't meant to be a shot. It's just a fact. If you go and study Marcus Davenport's film, one of the most frustrating things about Davenport was the man could never get balance, basically from the knee down. Just he couldn't do it, whatever reason. You say he's too tall to have that flexion, TJ, but tall players have had that level of flexion. He just wasn't one of them. He just wasn't one of them. Why? God only knows at this point. But he never had the ability to really capture the edge and dominate. And you are right that, being 6'7", it's tougher to do that. But there have been guys who've been able to pull that off. He just wasn't one of them. So anyway, that's time's passed, right? Those days are behind us. They're over. Don't got to worry about it. There you go. But that is, leverage, and creating leverage is actually one of the reasons that we talked about some of these offensive linemen being something that we worry about, that we're worried about. Rook says that Braden, I'm sorry, I almost called this man the wrong name. I always feel bad when I do that. There's just so many people in this game. So many people in the NFL draft. Braden Fisk. Braden. Now, here's my number one issue with Braden. I think he's a good rusher. I think that he has good, explosiveness. My number one thing is the man don't anchor very well. Now, that's fine. I do want to point out, I like his strength. I like his measurables. Don't really see him as a guy that you can rely on as a 3-down starter. And this actually goes into something we talked about earlier. He, 3-tech. That's kind of like what he is the best set to fit in on. You already just drafted that. You already got Brian Brzee to be your 3-tech of the future. Now, there's nothing wrong with having multiple good guys. New Orleans did that. Remember, New Orleans had David Onyemata and Sheldon Rankins at the same time. Hell, they drafted Sheldon Rankins when you had Big Nick Fairley here. So there's nothing wrong with doubling up on really good players. But he's one of those that he's actually more difficult because that he's limited to pass rushing right now while he continues to develop his strength, the lower body core, his hand usage, etc. But I do think that he's another guy who has potential to be a very plus starter. So, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good name. Saints need to trade down. They have too many holes in the roster. I mean, I do agree that trading down would be good, but where would you trade down? The only pick I think that they could trade down on that I would be okay with is pick 14. And if you could trade pick 14 and get something of value, if we pull up the draft chart, we'll pull up the trade value draft chart. This is from Draft Tech. We'll put it on the screen, everything, so that y'all can see it. Those who are watching the channel live, will give you the visual of it. Here is your draft chart right there. All right, that's a little bit small, so I'm going to go ahead and just increase the size here a little bit, so it's easier for y'all to see these very, very tiny numbers for those who are watching us live. And here we go. So New Orleans is sitting pretty. Pick 14. That's 1,100 points. So let's just say they wanted to trade back. I'm okay with them trading back. Well, if they were managing to get, say, 2 second-rounders or a first-rounder in the late rounds, let's say that Detroit came in. Detroit's worth about 600 points, and then Detroit did a first and a second next year. I'll take that. I would even take a first next year and a second this year. But that's conservative. You want to get more than that? Sure, absolutely. You can even make an argument for getting 3 picks. Depends on how you want to get to that 1,100 point valuation that you'll see right here. You could get a end of the first round pick and then a couple of third round picks. Because third round picks don't have a ton of value. So you get a first and a third this year, and maybe a third next year. Completely legit options. But really tough to do that just willy-nilly, and you got to have somebody willing to give you something, right? That's the tricky part. Who's willing to give you the value that you're seeking, right? Can you name anybody willing to do that? I really can. I like your logic in a position to think long term like that. I think New Orleans should try to do that. But even if they don't, they're sitting on 9 draft picks. And because we know this team is not a Super Bowl team right now, regardless of what they think they are, even if they just ended up with 4 fifth-round picks, I trust the scouting department to get at least 2 of those right. Scout says, my board this year is one of the thinnest in 16 years. Is this class thin with top-end starters, or is it the byproduct of growing as a scout? I will tell you this, not really knowing your scouting history, but I can speak to my scouting history and experience working with teams and stuff like that. There can come a time where you become overly critical. Like as you get deeper and deeper into trait-based analysis and you study things over and over, the natural tendency with trait-based analysis is to be studied and taught to find the flaws, right? When you do that, you start to get a little hypercritical. Now, I don't know you. I'm just answering your question. I'm not trying to call out any of your work. I don't really know your background, but you can get hypercritical to the point where you look at a guy and go, man, this sucks. I'm seeing this type of false step. There are NFL pro, like all pro wide receivers who still false step to this day. It's actually a debated topic among wide receiver coaches whether false stepping is even a problem. So you do want to watch out if you've been doing any type of evaluation for a while about becoming over hyperly critical when you're looking for specific traits that can be seen as negatives or are negative traits. And the same goes for positives, because as the saying goes, everybody's grandmother could tell you that Calvin Johnson was great, right? The tricky part of scouting is not finding out who's great. The tricky part is finding that, let's just say on your draft board, that 30 through 300, everybody in the middle and how you properly line those up, because there are players in this draft who are almost no-brainers. They're elite. They're starters. They're ready to go. But as we were taught, and as every NFL team I've ever talked to, I have never met a single NFL team, and I'm not trying to say I've met all of them. I've never met a single NFL team that had 32 players with first-round grades. Ever. Ever. They might have 20 players. They might have 24, 28 that fit them. But I've never met a team that had that many first-round grades. And when they do first-round grades, their first-round grade is saying, this guy's going to come in and start today, ready to go. So I think a big thing is just watching out about you being hypercritical on traits and understanding that you get to a point where everybody has some form of flaw that needs to be developed. Because the NFL, and I know that there are some hardcore college fans out there, you could take the worst NFL team in the NFL. We're talking New York Jets led by Nate Peterman last year. And they would just beat the ever-loving piss out of the national champion college team. And it wouldn't be close. And I'm not even trying to say that as a negative. It's just a fact. The Nate Peterman-led Jets would beat the dog out of everybody. The level of talent once you reach the NFL is huge. It's actually one of the reasons that we keep arguing, or I keep calling for a consistent farm team system, because guys coming out of college are not as good as NFL players. He just says, I'm not sure Panthers could beat last year's Michigan. I am. I am pretty damn confident that they could absolutely waylay them. Absolutely. I guess unless Tepper was calling the plays. Unless Tepper was calling the plays. So, unless the owner himself came down and called the plays, the Panthers would kill him. I'll put it this way. Nobody on Michigan is stopping Burns last year. Nobody. None. Not a single player. Not a single dream. That's just one player. Not a single one. That's going to be like an 8-sack game. And I'm not trying to be dramatic with my thoughts and stuff like that. I'm just being real. You do have college players who could play at the NFL level. And even when you have a team that's really good that has, maybe like we talk about LSU teams, Alabama teams, now Michigan teams that are going to put a lot of players in the league. Absolutely nobody is ready to take on Brian Burns from last year today that's coming into the combine. There's not. That's just one person. That's just one person. That's not even counting like Pro Bowler Derek Brown in the middle. Like Derek Brown is a grown A man. Like he's not college age. That dude is 330 pounds, 6'5", and he's hit the old man strength age. Oh, he ain't getting stopped. And that's just two players, right? So it isn't to say that college guys suck. It's just there's a level of development that happens where, when you talk about just physically, people getting older and stronger and better, and then two, the different levels of coaching and everything. The Carolina Panthers, the New York Jets from Nate Peterman would beat the tar out of any college team. Now, I'm not saying that the college team wouldn't score, and I'm not saying the college team doesn't have good players. I'm just saying that even if your argument is this college team has 18 guys in the combine, which is the one you use, TJ, let me give you a fun fact. The NFL team that I just referenced has 53 guys in the combine. Yeah. So, like, it's just a numbers game. Even the best college team can't match up toe-to-toe with the best or even the worst NFL team, but that doesn't mean that that college team does not have really good pieces that can be integral to teams moving forward, right? Derek Brown would have a feast. I have to agree. I think that Derek Brown would indeed have a feast. T says, I'm sure there's someone on Carolina that isn't a combine invite. All right, cool. So, you know what? I'll even give you 10. I'll say that only 40 of Carolina's players on their active roster were invited to the combine. That's still more than double by a lot. And that's not counting the fact that some of these guys are Pro Bowlers and like really, really heckin' good. Really, really heckin' good. I'm just saying. You want to rattle a college quarterback, put an NFL Pro Bowl pass rusher on it. You know what? You want to rattle a college quarterback, put freaking Derek Brown 2 feet from his face every snap. How's that going to work out for him? You want to talk about what's intimidating? You put any college quarterback 2 feet away, 2 feet away from Derek Brown. Good luck. Adam Thielen, good call out. Adam Thielen. He did turn out good. And I'm not saying that guys have to go to the combine to be great. Y'all understand the point I'm making, right? There's just a talent disparity there. Even though that you can be the best in college doesn't mean you can be the best in the NFL. Hell, Reggie Bush is the best college running back I've ever watched. I mean, there have been a couple of other ones. Bijan Robinson was also nuts in college. But Reggie Bush was never the best running back in the NFL. Saquon Barkley, absolutely incredible. I guess we can argue the injury thing, but even when Saquon Barkley was healthy, was never the best running back in the NFL. At least not yet, right? NFL is a different beast. That's actually what makes scouting so hard and so much fun. So hard and so much fun. Yeah. Whew. Good chats. You still think the 2001 Miami team and the 2020 LSU could get one win versus the worst NFL team? All right, one win out of how many attempts? One win out of how many attempts? There you go. If you want to say that if they played 100 times, I will give you one win. I'll give you one win out of 100 attempts. But this is why I just absolutely cannot wait for college football video games again. Absolutely cannot wait. I'm so excited about college football video games. It's like my childhood is coming back to life. My kids will get to experience it. So that's where we are, right, man? I feel like there's a lot of good names that can fit New Orleans. In terms of some of the ones that I'm looking at, such a long list because I think that New Orleans could go a litany of directions and none of them will be wrong. I think any offensive line, defensive line, wide receiver, safety, which I don't feel like, I'm actually surprised I don't see more Saints podcasts talking about safety. That was a big one for me. I'm really surprised we don't see more safeties getting mentioned. But example, Daniel Jeremiah, he's the guy that I have followed for years. And he had the New Orleans Saints taking Fashanu, who I'm a little bit more hesitant on Fashanu because of how much work I feel like he needs. But at the same time, I understand. My only problem is, like, I'm talking about a guy who needed work in Trevor Penning, and now I'm talking about a guy who needed work in Fashanu being the left tackle. But I would say that Fashanu is probably more ready to go than Penning was. But that was a recent one. But even then, I wouldn't be upset with it. There's still other guys that I like a little bit more. I know Scout mentioned J.C. Latham. I wouldn't be upset if that happened. I also wouldn't be upset if they went and got Latu, even though they just got Chase Young, right? You win games by building the trenches. So there's nothing wrong with that logic for me. And then you start talking about what can happen in the second round and everything. And I think there's a lot that New Orleans could do to find long-term success in this draft. And I really do love the trade back idea. A couple other names I've seen. One thing I haven't also seen first round for New Orleans is corner. But you can go into the second round and some of the names that I would love to talk about, especially at safety. Like I talked about Mims at offensive line. He could drop into the second round due to injury concerns. I would love to pick him up. But I think running back, safety, those are guys that probably aren't going to go until the second round. So you got guys like Jaden Hicks, who you can consider adding some youth to the New Orleans Saints roster. I still feel that there are quality players. I'm surprised I haven't seen more LSU fans mention Mason Smith, who could be a second or a third round pickup. I'm actually shocked by that. You got Javin Ballard, who I'm surprised I haven't seen more people talk about maybe getting a guy like him in the second round. Hyper athletic, has the range, has the ability to move. I do feel like as the high safety, he needs a lot of work, but at the same time, I feel New Orleans has done really well with taking those guys and developing them, right? He has great route anticipation when he plays off man. I think that he's a very sure tackler, and I feel like the Saints need to get younger at safety, but that's a name I don't see brought up very often, right? All these are good answers. Any favorite prospects this year? Draft position, I like a couple of slot safeties this year, Javin Ballard and Aladapo fill that high energy void. See, what I would like to do is I would put Ballard back in, but I would actually work him towards it. I think that Ballard has the tangibles to be a deep safety. He just needs good coaching. And while there aren't positions on this team that I trust to be coached very well, corners and safeties are one of those positions I feel like Dennis Allen can get value out of. So if you drafted Bullard and you put him up front, that's fine. I would live with it. But I think that he could be equally as effective as a deep safety. I really do. I absolutely do. I feel like he could either be a nickel safety, a strong safety, or a free safety. I feel like he could do any of the three, depending on what any team that has the ability to develop puts him in. He's a guy I'm excited about. I actually would be ecstatic to see him picked in the second round. And at the same time, I wouldn't mind if they went and got big Devondre Sweat, even though I don't know where he would play this year. I still would have no problem with it. I feel like there are some really good options here for the Saints. Then the key is getting into the third round, man. I want to see them get into the third round and maybe pick up, I don't know, tight end Theo Johnson. Just throwing y'all out a name who I think could, work with this team. Hyper athletic guy who needs a lot of development, sounding familiar. He's 6'6", he's 250, 255, but he runs a 4.5 40, had a 1.5 split, which as a tight end is just like really heckin' good. And he missed some games due to injury back in 2022, but played every game last year. Like, that's my kind of guy. Like a flex tight end, bringing in the third round. I would love to see them get a third round pick and pull that in. Lacey says, considering the questions around Ram and Penning, how would you go about fixing our O-line this offseason? What's the ideal outcome? Number one is bring in more free agents. And number two, draft at least one tackle. At least one. At least one. I've got a list of names that I personally love at tackle. I don't expect everybody to have the same list of names, which is completely okay. But in terms of who I would like to see the New Orleans Saints take at offensive tackle, Huaga's a big one that I like. I'm okay with Fashanu. I do like Mims, even with the injury history. Joe Alt is actually one that I am not as big on as other people. Not because I don't think that Joe Alt can be good, but Joe Alt has a lot of problems overextending, playing with leverage, and he's 6'9". And when you're that big and you're that tall, it's pretty easy to lose leverage. I think he's got a lot of work to perfect that. But it's not even about him. I don't believe the Saints can perfect that. So I'm looking at guys who are more ready to go now at offensive line. Whereas I think Alt, if he goes to the right place, he's going to be a stud. But if he goes somewhere that doesn't help coach out some of those little things to deal with him being 6'9", that could be problematic. That could be trouble. So, yeah. I hope that wasn't too much word vomit and overload. Probably about 20 or so offensive tackles with an above rating of 80. I don't know if I'd say 80, but maybe 78, 77 for giving Madden scores. So, but I'm definitely not against taking a tackle because even if those guys are needing work, they're still a hell of a lot better than what you saw on the left side last year. So, interesting points on Alt. Mims feels like he might not fit with the outside zone scheme of Kubiak. Definitely potential to have that concern, sure. I see Mims as a guy who does have the athleticism to play in that zone system. My issue with Mims is more of can he sustain the block? I mean, in a lot of ways, it reminds me of our Mr. Cesar Ruiz, but limited experience, I think, is more his issue. But I actually see great length, great size, and good mobility. I didn't say great mobility. I said good mobility. But I do like Mims. I think he can come in and contribute. I think he can play multiple spots. I like him. It's just more of, are you worried about health? Right? Are you worried about health? I think that he is good. That tightrope surgery is going to be something that makes a lot of people wary. I think it makes a lot of people wary. But I do think that he has the athleticism to play that spot on the right side should they go after it. And we'll just kind of see how that goes. And guys, we have got to wrap up here because I have an appointment here. That appointment is called Daddy Duties. But the draft is coming up. I'm really excited about it. I'm having a lot of fun. I want to see this conversation in the Discord if you haven't joined already. Who dat? God bless. Don't forget to watch your Pels tonight. They tip off in under 1 hour. Can't wait to see them. We got to root for them. Make sure that they don't disappoint us. Don't pull New Orleans Saints, Pelicans. We'll see them tonight versus the Kings, and we'll see you the next podcast here very, very soon.